Welcome back to another episode of Really Bad Videos. I am your digitally programmed host, Joey, and today we are going to talk about the war in Ukraine. Now I know this stuff can get complicated and be confusing, but remember that I was programmed by a 9-year-old. So if he can understand this stuff, then so can you. I hope this video is helpful to others and of course it leads to a good grade. On February 24th, Russian military forces invaded the country of Ukraine. To understand why this war began, maybe we should learn more about the countries first. Although Ukraine has only been an independent nation since the year 1991, its history goes back over 1,000 years. Its capital, Kiev, is over 1,500 years old. Taking a look at this time lapse of Ukraine's borders throughout history, you can see that the Ukrainian people have been around for a very long time. There are clearly times when the country didn't even exist. But the people were always there. A lot of the time they were even a part of Russia, and the two countries have close ties. The president of Ukraine is Volodymyr Zelensky, seen here wondering if President Trump just pooped his pants. He has been in office since the year 2019. The president before Zelensky was a guy named Petro Poroshenko, seen here preparing to kiss President Biden directly on the mouth. He was president from 2014 until 2019. And the president before him was Viktor Yanukovych, who served from 2010 until he was removed from office during the Ukrainian Revolution of 2014. He is seen here with Vladimir Putin, the guy who is invading Ukraine now. Ukraine has a population of about 44 million people, and the Ukrainian military is somewhere around the 30th strongest military in the world. The country produces a lot of potatoes and grain, among other things. Ukraine's main trading partners are Russia,
China,
Germany, and Poland. Now let's take a look at the history of Russia. The president of Russia is Vladimir Putin. He has been the leader of Russia since 1999. Aside from posing shirtless during masculine activities, President Putin has spent the past 2 decades jostling for position on the world stage. Russia has a population of almost 146 million people. They have the 3rd strongest military in the world, and are one of the world's leading suppliers of oil and gas. Their top trading partners are
China,
Germany, Belarus, and the United States. This illustration shows the expansion of Russia historically. As you can see, there were times Ukraine and Russia were a single nation. They have been neighbors for a very long time. So now that we have learned a little about the two countries, we should discuss the more recent world events that led up to this war. We should probably start at the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is when Ukraine became an independent nation. This is how Europe looked after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Many territories that fell under it became their own independent countries, such as Estonia, Latvia, Belarus, Lithuania, Moldova, and, of course, Ukraine. Each of these new, weak, poor nations suddenly found themselves torn between accepting aid and influence from the Russian Federation to the east, or from Europe and the United States to the west. One way the West tried to influence them is with NATO. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was created in 1949 in order to establish mutual protection from a Soviet military threat. The idea was simple: each country would treat an attack on any of the member countries as an attack on all the member countries. This alliance served as an effective deterrent from a Soviet threat. However, the organization only continued to grow after the Soviet Union had collapsed. This is a direct contradiction from promises the United States and NATO made to the Soviet Union during negotiations to reunite Germany in the late 1980s. If Ukraine also becomes a NATO member, then almost the entire western Russian border would be hostile territory. This has been an internal debate within the Ukrainian people since the country was formed in 1991, fueled by influencers and the interests of both the East and the West. Take a look at this timeline of Ukraine's presidents and each of their positions toward the East and West. Ukraine's first president, Leonid Kravchuk, was more aligned with Russia. However, he was defeated in the next election by Leonid Kuchma, who was friendlier with the West and NATO. Leonid Kuchma remained the president of Ukraine until 2005, when he chose not to run for another term and Viktor Yushchenko was elected in his place. Yushchenko only served one term because in 2010 he lost the next election to Viktor Yanukovych. This change in leadership would steer Ukraine back toward influence from the east, but would also lead to a Ukrainian civil war. In November 2013, Yanukovych refused to enter a trade agreement with the European Union that a majority of Ukraine seemed to want. Instead, he chose a trade option proposed by Russia that did not have as much support. This led to large protests throughout the country that eventually caused an organized revolt and the removal of Yanukovych in February 2014. Alexander Turchynov was installed as president after Yanukovych was removed and went into exile in Russia. He was only president for 115 days, until Petro Poroshenko was elected in June of 2014. Poroshenko served as president until 2019, when we lost the election to Volodymyr Zelensky, who remains as Ukraine's president today. Since Ukraine gained independence in 1991, each president has faced the dilemma of choosing between the East and West. Just days after Yanukovych was removed from office in 2014, the Russian army invaded and captured Crimea, a peninsula on the southern edge of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin said that because of the civil war breaking out in Ukraine, he needed to protect the large amount of military assets and ethnic Russians in Crimea, who make up the majority of the population. A rapid vote was held after the occupation, and Crimea officially became part of Russia in March 2014. Also, at the same time in eastern Ukraine, a rebellion began in the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. These regions sought to separate themselves from Ukraine after Yanukovych's removal, and fighting began between Ukrainian government forces and pro-Russian separatists. A ceasefire was reached in Minsk, Belarus, in September 2014, however, it failed to stop the fighting, so, a second ceasefire was reached in February 2015. It was agreed that heavy weapons should be removed from the front lines and that Donetsk and Luhansk should hold elections to determine their futures. However, none of this has happened. And this has basically been the situation until February, when Russia launched a full invasion on Ukraine. There are many more details surrounding the events of Ukraine that have not been covered, such as how evil and ruthless Putin might be, how harmful and destructive Western influence has the potential to become, who are the people behind the corruption in Ukraine, the strengthening ties between the countries of
China
and Russia, or what happens if Russia or another country decides to use nuclear weapons. I don't have all those answers, but I am sure that all sides have some blame. But that is all the time I am programmed for, so I will see you next time. Thanks for watching, and if you don't subscribe to my channel, I will hack your computer and steal all your Bitcoin.